Hey there, I'm Sienna Del Vasto, and thank you for joining. Mic is muted. Hey there, I'm Sienna Del Vasto. Thank you for joining us on the OS DevSlop show. If you recently became responsible for security of an AWS environment, stay with us as AWS security expert AJ Yawn demonstrates 5 actionable steps security practitioners can take to initiate the early steps necessary to implement a cloud governance program.
Hello, welcome. I'm Nancy and I'm here with my co-host, my other lovely co-host, Faith Opio. Hi, Faith. Can you hear me, Faith? I guess not. Okay, if you're new here, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and enable your notification. All important information that we'll discuss today will be added to the description box below. So, Faith, we can't hear you. It's your turn. You're up.
Sorry. I had to change my audios. Anyway, hey, my name is Faith. OWASP is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. Throughout the year, we'll ask you questions to check how well you know the Open Web Application Security Project. And we will raffle away 1-year membership to the winner. A question for the audience today is, name one of the chapter leaders of your local OWASP chapter.
Okay, so I'll repeat that question. We're looking to find who's the local chapter of your local OWASP chapter. We have a form for it that we'll put in the chat. Your audio is a bit choppy, Faith, but we'll take care of it, I think, eventually. Let's go ahead and present our guest. Our guest today is AJ Yawn. He's the co-founder and CEO of ByteChek. He's also the founding member of the National Association of Black Compliance and Risk Management Professionals. AJ has earned 6 AWS certification, including the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the AWS Security Specialty. Prior to ByteChek, AJ spent over a decade in the cybersecurity industry, both in the US Army and as a principal consultant. So welcome, AJ.
Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for having me. Definitely, I'm excited about today and excited to join you three here on the show.
Excellent. What do you have prepared for us today?
Yeah, so this is going to be a interactive scenario-based conversation where we're just going to talk about something that happens often to people. They show up to a new organization, the company's hosted on AWS, and they want to make a good impression. They want to show their boss that they know what they're doing. They want to be able to demonstrate some expertise really quickly and get some quick wins. So I'll try to take about an hour here to make sure that you can go in and immediately set yourself up for success.
Perfect. Should I share your screen?
Yep.
I don't see it right now.
I'll go ahead and share. I see someone in the chat wanted to get the OWASP chapter question repeated.
Yes, so we're looking for the name of one of the chapter leaders of your local chapter. So we have chapters everywhere around the world. You probably have one that's close to you. So find the closest to you and maybe and tell us in the form the name of one of those chapter leaders. That makes sense. And you'll see when you see the form, you'll probably see the question in there. Not probably, you see it.
Awesome. Thank you. So, I won't spend too much time on my background since Nancy, you did tell everybody about me, so I definitely appreciate that. I'll tell folks a little bit about ByteChek. ByteChek is a cybersecurity software company really designed and created with one goal in mind: to make compliance suck less. And we've been in the industry for a very long time. We understand all the nuances that go into compliance, and we just want to make the process a lot faster, easier, more focused on security, which is some of the stuff we'll get into today. So I encourage anyone to, if you're out there, I'm pretty open and available to be reached. So connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out. I love meeting new people in the industry. So if you're watching this and would like to meet, please come out and make sure and reach out to me and chat with me, and we'll go from there. So let's get right into it. And we'll talk about this scenario here. We'll talk, and what I want to just clear up before we dive into the details is that although you're going to be in this position, and we talked about it, you want to show your boss that you want some quick wins here, right? You want to show them immediately that you've identified some weaknesses, you fix them, you set some scalable stuff. And we're going to focus in AWS. We're going to focus in the AWS account. We're going to be in the CLI a little bit, but there's so much more you should do outside of AWS to have a full understanding of security in your organization and a full understanding to really dive into what's going on from a security perspective, right? And some of the things that you should do just before we get into the technical side is go out and meet with key stakeholders in the organization. As a security professional, the number one thing that you're going to do, especially as you grow up in the industry, is become a security enabler. You have to go out and build relationships with the finance team, the legals team, the development teams, the system administrators. You have to go out and be able to talk to all these people to make sure you understand what they do and how to incorporate security into it. So you should go out and meet with these people, find out the tools they're using. The reason why you meet with finance is you want to go see the bill for your AWS account. You want to go see if there's, or all of your AWS accounts. You want to see how many accounts are there. Are there any Microsoft Azure stuff out there that you need to be worried about, or GCP or anything like that? So meet with these folks, try to figure out and really paint the picture of what this environment is, and this goes well beyond technical stuff, and that's just one point I want to hit home here, is that there's so much more to do, outside of what we're going to show today. One great place to start is your compliance reports. If you show up to an organization, ask around and say, hey, what compliance attestations or examinations have we achieved? And go out and get those reports. Talk to the people that were involved, because you can get a lot of information about the scope of the environment, tools that are used, technologies, people involved, and all that good stuff. So just to kind of frame that up really quickly, is make sure you're not just thinking I'm going to show up and I'm going to go get an AWS and I'm not going to talk to anybody. You need to go out and talk to people, definitely.
And when you're saying you should get a report, is that a company or an organization that provides a service, or would all organizations are required to have their own assessment report?
Yeah, no one actually is really required from a compliance assessment perspective, but what happens is a customer or vendor or an investor says, hey, I need you to prove security to me, so go get a third-party audit report, and then it becomes kind of a requirement throughout the year. But most of the time, it's going to be service organizations, like you said, Nancy. It's going to be people that are providing a service to someone else. But oftentimes, other organizations are answering security questionnaires all the time, or they're reviewing, having to review their security policies with a vendor. So even if you don't have a compliance report, right? Even if they don't, somebody in the organization is answering security questions. Someone is constantly giving back to customers or third parties what security is going on in your organization, and go find out how they're answering those questions. Go find out where they're getting information from to answer those questions. And that's going to be really critical, just to, again, paint that picture. So Nancy, to answer your questions, everyone won't have this report, but it's pretty common nowadays that you're going to get some form of security questions and something that you're putting together to answer those questions.
For sure. Unless you're employee number one, but yeah.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Makes sense.
All right. So some key assumptions before we hop into the console that I just want everyone to be aware of, so that no one thinks that I'm kind of just making things up here. Well, I guess I am making them up. But so the company that this example company that we're coming up with, right? Just assume that they're hosting everything in a single account. Let's assume that there's no single sign-on or federated identity out there. They're just using identity and access management on AWS. And a situation that a lot of you may find yourselves in, especially if you get into the startup space, is in the early days of startups, the company doesn't really focus on security. They're focusing on growing the product, growing the team, getting marketing going, getting sales going, because the lifeline of the business is to grow whatever they're selling, right? But now that they're growing, now that there's a lot of some traction here, customers are starting to ask for security. They're asking, hey, what are you guys doing from a security perspective? And they need to take security seriously. So the position you find yourself in is a company that has been doing some things. They have some resources out there. They're working hard in AWS, but they haven't really been thinking about security just yet. And usually when you go to a company and they're starting to raise a venture capital round, like a Series A or something like that, that's when security becomes really important. A lot of eyes comes on the organization, and if you find yourself in that situation, hopefully this overview, this thing we go through today, can help you get some of those quick wins. So let's go ahead and stop the slide stuff. I know I posted on LinkedIn that I wasn't going to have any slides.
Going slideless.
That was the plan, but I did want to have a little bit of a frame up front just to make sure we all were on the same page. And I'm going to go between kind of advanced concepts to beginner concepts, and I'll try to explain things as I'm doing them. But Nancy, Faith, Susanna, everybody on the call here, or even in the chat, if you have any questions, if I say something and you want to just interrupt me, please. Let's make this very open and a free flowing conversation. And let's go ahead and get started. So
I'll interrupt just a few seconds, AJ.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a bit of the background of the ladies, because Sienna's it's her first show today, so the audience hasn't met her before, and Faith is pretty new to the team as well. So tell us a little bit about your background, Sienna.
Well, I do offensive security, mostly on the application security side of the house, and so I get to do some testing on AWS too. And I've actually taken a couple courses, so I'm really excited for this presentation, AJ. And I'll try not to interrupt you too much.
And Faith, you're a network expert, aren't you?
I'm actually a threat hunter, but my background is in networking. So I started off as a network engineer, but moved on to security.
Fantastic.
And I am more of a defender.
Excellent.
With interests in offensive security.
Yeah. So that
Nice.
usually informs where our questions are coming from. So I just want to take a minute to let everybody know who's around the table. So yes, go ahead. Sorry, AJ.
No, please interrupt. I love it. I need the open conversation. It'll help me a lot too, because I might forget something and it gives me a chance to remember.
Challenge accepted.
So yeah, the first we're in identity and access management, which is a service here on AWS for you to control users, permissions, groups, roles. Anybody familiar with AWS knows IAM. And the first thing that I would say to do when you first join an organization, especially in this setup when we're not using any federated identities, is to download the credential report. And the credential report is something that's going to give you a ton of insight into all of your users, what's their MFA status, are they using their access keys, when's the last time they've logged into the console, all these different things. And we're going to take a look at an example credential report here in a second. But really quick before I hop off of IAM, because IAM is just so important on AWS. You can't do anything on AWS unless you are explicitly allowed. So that's a service, that's a user, that's a machine. It doesn't matter what it is, unless you specify that thing or person can do something with IAM policies. You can't do anything on the cloud. So everything starts with IAM. If you're ever having troubles with something in AWS, check the IAM policies first before you go down a rabbit hole and waste 12 hours troubleshooting. That's me saying that from experience. Check IAM permissions first. You'll save yourself a ton of time because there's probably just an issue there somewhere where you didn't explicitly allow something. And the other thing here to point out is, just like we know about, if you're familiar with security, before non-cloud security, there's role-based access control in the cloud. There's role-based access control here on IAM, where you can have groups, you can have users, you can have roles, you can have policies. Policies is really where a lot of the powerful stuff happens, and we'll get into that. With groups, I do want to just share this for any security professional out there. Don't trust the names of the groups. As you can see here, I have an admin group, I have a DBA group, and a sales group. So you can be like, great, yeah, they're using groups and they're segmenting their users, but let's take a look at the sales group. Why does the sales group have administrator access? A sales rep probably doesn't need administrator access. So yes, you can use these functions such as groups, roles, policies, users, etc. But it's always important to get the context around them and find out what are the permissions associated with these users and what are they allowed to do. So as you can see here, we have a few users. I'm actually logged in as the ByteChek user. And for any of the folks out there that are watching this, either live or in the future, you're going to see some sensitive stuff. I'm going to delete this account as soon as we get off of here. So don't waste your time, please, trying to break in. It's not gonna be fun for you because it's not gonna exist here in about 45 minutes or so. So with that being said, I'll pop over to the credential report. Unless any of you have any questions or comments here on IAM, anything that I said that you wanted to chime in on.
No, not for my part, but we do have from the chat, Pablo asking, is that under SCP, like the service controlled policies?
We're going to get into service control policies actually in step 5, but no, service control policies are down here. You can see in the console. Where you'll really interact with them will be under the AWS Organizations service, but we'll dive into service control policies, a very powerful feature here on AWS from a security perspective.
So we'll put that on pause and address it at step 5. Awesome.
Yep. Yeah, let me try to zoom in here a little bit. Hopefully you all can see some of this stuff, but I'll try to explain it. So this is the credential report. This is what it would look like. You can get this out of the CLI. You can get it, of course, out of the console, like I just showed you. And the stuff that you see here is pretty important. If you're going through an audit, and this is just me with my compliance brain on a little bit, if you're going through an audit, don't give your auditor screenshots of your users. Give them the credential report. It doesn't make any sense to give screenshots. Don't waste your time doing that. Download the credential report and give this to your auditors to use. It makes your life a lot easier. So there's a few things that you want to look for here on this credential report immediately. Is the first line here is the root account. So you want to see how is the root account being used, or is it being used? So the password was last used recently. You might want to follow up, write that down and say, hey, let me go talk to somebody and figure out why are we using the root account. Best practice on AWS is you should not be using your root account at all. That should be locked away with MFA enabled on it. The MFA device stored in a drawer somewhere, no one really accessing it, because we all know what root is, and on AWS, root is exactly what you think it is. It can do everything. It can delete your account, literally delete your account. So make sure that you check out why is someone using root. The good things here is that we see that root account has MFA enabled. That's a really great thing. That's the number one thing you should do on AWS is enable MFA. We also see that the access keys for this account have been deleted, which is another very important thing. You should not have root access keys out there at all. Those keys should be deleted. And again, this account should not be used. So slightly a good sign there. But if you can see the rest of this MFA active column, all of these users don't have MFA enabled. And before we get into any of the cool security stuff on AWS and auto-remediation and things like that, you always have to protect your front door. It doesn't matter what cool stuff you have, all of the Intel intrusion detection systems, web application firewalls. If somebody can just walk in through the front door as a user, it won't matter. So the MFA is not a fail-safe. It's not going to prevent you from being hacked, right? But it's going to make things a little bit more difficult. It's going to make it a little bit more challenging for someone to attack you. And that's all you want to do as a security professional is make the level of effort of a bad actor, make them try a little bit harder to get to you. And hopefully they get bored and want to go mess with someone else. So we see here that MFA is not enabled. And you can see here is like, these aren't just dormant users, right? You can see the AJ account, the ByteChek accounts have been used recently. We've also been using our access keys recently over here in the US East 1 region. So you can see that these are real users. These are users that are doing stuff. They don't have MFA enabled. And this is just something that you want to fix ASAP. You really want to just get this cleaned up. Now, there's really two ways you can go about this. The first way is the wrong way. The wrong way is you could email every single one of these users. And this is a pretty small environment, right? There's only like 9 or 10 users. Not that bad. Imagine if this was 100 users, right? And you had to email every single one of them and say, hey, go enable MFA. And then you follow up with them 2 weeks later. Hey, you didn't enable MFA. 2 more weeks. Oh, you didn't enable MFA. The first 6 weeks of your job, you're just going to be making people enabled MFA. And that's definitely not what you were hired for. You were not hired to do repeated tasks. You were hired to think. So that's the wrong way to do it. The right way to do it, which I'm about to show you, is implementing a Force MFA policy. And what this policy will do is it will prevent any user from doing anything on AWS, regardless of their permissions. So all of these users here have administrator permissions. Regardless of their permissions, the only thing that they're going to be able to do is enable MFA. And then once they enable MFA, they'll get their permissions back. And we'll walk through how to do this. So let me reshare my screen here to a different window. And we're going to do this in the CLI because I do want to just share with everybody here on the show. When you're first getting into AWS, and if you're just starting out, by all means, go to the console. Please go to the console. You're going to learn a lot. It's really easy to understand, move around, and create things. But as you get more familiar with AWS, the CLI is extremely powerful. It's just a very powerful tool, a very powerful way to do things in a repeated manner, and do things without needing to. My biggest reason I like the CLI is troubleshooting. When I break things, it's a lot easier to find out what I broke here than in the console, because in the console, you're just staring at a web application and you don't know what's wrong. But there's a lot of cool things that you can learn here. It's not that difficult to learn. A ton of documentation out there, and if you know how to use Stack Overflow, you know how to use the CLI, because everybody has went there at least once or twice to figure things out. So I'm not going to spend too many times like explaining what different commands are and different things like that. But what I will do is try to make sure I explain a little bit of how we're going through things. So really quick, right? What I'll do first is I'm going to create this Force MFA policy. And what you're seeing here as I'm getting started is with every command here, it's going to start with AWS. The next up is going to be a service. So just like we were in the IAM console, I'm typing IAM and I'm going to have a command next. So that's all of these things in here in the CLI are going to start the same way. The AWS service, and then what is the action that I'm trying to do? What is the thing that I'm trying to go ahead and implement? And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a Force MFA policy. And we'll talk about this policy here when I get in the console. I'm going to show you the breakdown of the policy, and I'm just going to go ahead and go through this really quickly. I'm able to get the policy, it's on my desktop, just listed there on the desktop that I'm able to go get. And really easy way to do that. And if you see that profile at the end, think of that as a user. In the AWS CLI, you can have named profiles. So I could have multiple accounts that I'm using here to access things. And just when you ever see me type profile AJ in there, that's just my user account. You're going to see me type profile ByteChek here in a little bit, also going to be my user account. So before I hop back into the console, I am going to do something that's going to help us understand a concept later on related to S3 buckets. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create create an S3 bucket, and I'm going to create it in the US East 1 region. And Nancy or Faith or Sienna, someone just remind me to explain why I did that in US East 1 a little bit later, because there is a reason for that. And one of the things that you can see here is, and I just did something wrong, which is one thing that is beautiful about the CLI, is that you're allowed to do things wrong and it's very easy to fix. So I want everybody to know, like, you're not going to be perfect in security. You're not going to be perfect in anything you do. So it's okay to make mistakes and it's really easy to fix. So we'll call this the AJ Yawn. I forgot to include the bucket name. That's what just happened there. We'll call this the AJ Yawn OWASP bucket. And there it goes, it's created. And as you all can see there, it's pretty easy to create a resource. This is the beauty of the cloud. This is what is great about the cloud, but this is also what's bad about the cloud, because it's so easy to spin up new things. And I didn't set any configurations here. I didn't say I want this bucket to be private or I wanted it to be encrypted or anything. I just created a bucket. And it was that easy for me to do. And what I want to show you all before we get back to the Force MFA policy, and this is going to make a ton of sense a little bit later, is that in this account that we're in right now, I have a few buckets created. And this command here is just going to list out these buckets. And as you can see here, I have this AJ Yawn OWASP bucket I just created, this auto-remediated OWASP DevSlops bucket that I created earlier as well. And I want to show you a few of the configurations associated with these buckets compared to the bucket that I just created. And then we'll come all the way back to this here in a little bit. So first thing I'm going to show you is just the bucket encryption status there on that bucket that we were just looking at.
I think
and I messed up something again.
You have a misspelling on the bucket.
Oh, I spelled bucket wrong.
Bucket, yeah.
There we go. So this is what it's supposed to look like. You're supposed to see that AES 256 is enabled, right? That's the standard server-side encryption on AWS. And what I'm going to do now is let's take a look at the bucket that I just created. So again, very easy to create resources on the cloud, which is why there's so many issues. Now the error is occurring because the server-side encryption configuration was not found. And if I did this to check public access for this bucket as well, we wouldn't see public access on the public access blocked on this bucket. And we'll come back to that, and you'll understand why I did that a little bit later. So let's hop back into the console because I want to show you all this Force MFA policy that we created. All right. So I'm in the console, and everyone that if you're familiar with AWS, you've seen these policies before, these JSON policies here in AWS, and you don't have to know JSON at all to create IAM policies. You don't have to be a programmer to create IAM policies. You can use this visual editor, and you can literally select services, select the permissions you want. Like I said, it's just as you get more familiar with this service, it becomes a lot easier to do things as you're able to understand this stuff. So every single JSON policy, I'll just give a really brief overview. Every single JSON policy, and you all can see my screen, right? I know I'm popping between screens. I just want to make sure I'm not sharing anything crazy.
Yep.
I think I saw some head nods. So I think
Yep.
I'm good. So every single JSON policy has this effect statement, which is simply going to say you're either allowed or you're denied to do something. That's going to be everywhere. And these are called elements. So you have this effect element, action element, resource element. The action element, this is going to be the meat of like, what can this person, resource, whatever it may be, what can they do? And these are going to be followed very similar to what you saw in the command line there as service, and then the action that you can take. So you would see S3 here, and then an action, or EC2 and an action. Here we're seeing IAM, right? And then lastly, this last element here is a resource. So this is going to be where does this policy apply to? And oftentimes you'll see wildcards here, which is what you see down here, which means it applies to all resources. The interesting thing about this Force MFA policy is this not action element. So this is a little unique compared to what you normally see in a policy, where you normally see these action elements. And the reason why this is unique, but it's also somewhat advanced, is because it allows you to deny access to all of the listed resources. So to every resource you're denied access to, except for these actions specified here in this IAM section here, or underneath the not action. So for this policy, the way that you should read this is you will be denied access to all resources except for these services here if you did not authenticate with multi-factor authentication. And that's what that condition element down there at the bottom is. It says if you did not authenticate with MFA, you will be denied access to do anything in this environment. So that's just this wasn't supposed to be a deep dive into JSON policies at all. But I did want to just make sure you understood kind of how the policy worked, and how we're going to go ahead and apply this here in a second. So let me pop back over to the CLI. We're going to apply this policy to these accounts, and you all will get a chance to see how this works.
AJ,
let me clear my
may I
screen.
please request that you increase the font, please?
I need to, while I'm doing this, I'm going to pause because I need to log into the console as a different user, because I'm about to lock myself out when I apply this policy. So I'll pause here for a second. Apologies for the kind of delay here, but I'll be quiet too, just in case any of you have any questions or comments so far.
I don't think you heard. Yeah, go ahead.
AJ, can you hear me? I don't think AJ can hear me.
I don't think he can hear us. Can you hear
AJ? Hello.
All right.
Hey.
Log back in.
Hey, AJ. Can you hear me?
AJ.
No.
Talking.
Oh, this is fun.
We are talking.
I can't hear anyone.
Oh, no.
He's just realizing.
All right, let's see if I take my AirPods out.
I was having the same issue today, actually, with the AirPods. So.
Yeah, I stick with my cord. Just It's either a battery, either like something's going on. So
There we
Yeah.
go.
find it reliable. You can hear us now?
I can hear you now.
Awesome.
Hello,
Hey, AJ.
welcome.
Welcome
I hope you all were able to hear me, because that would have been a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of talking for not.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just-
so now
Just a request. Could you please increase your font a little bit
On
on the
terminal.
CLI? Yeah.
sure.
Thank you.
Oops, I just made it smaller.
Others, I'm like squinting.
I kept making my screen full so I can read it. I'm like, okay, well, at least I can see it here.
Move closer, closer.
Let's see. Does this help?
We're not seeing it yet. You're not sharing the screen.
No, it's
Oh.
smaller.
It's smaller.
Went the other
It's
way.
command plus
Mhm.
on the keyboard, I guess.
There we well. How about now?
Command
Same
plus.
thing.
Same. It's not. It looks like, because I'm seeing it down here in StreamYard, that it's getting bigger on my screen, but not on the StreamYard. So hold
Okay.
on, because it's like so large now that I can't even read it.
There, it's better.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
so
better.
I had to make my terminal very, very small. The smaller I make my terminal, the better for you all. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry.
That's better?
Yeah.
It's opposite
Alright.
settings in terminal.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm glad that we all can see this now. Okay, so now let's go ahead and attach this policy to, before we do that, I want to show you again with this ByteChek user, because the ByteChek user was in the sales group from what I remember. There we go. We have these buckets here. So let's go ahead and attach this policy to the sales group. So the group name is sales, and if I need to go get the policy ARN that I just created. I should have did that when I first created it, but you know, live demos, right? All right. And ARN, just for those that don't know, it's Amazon resource. Is it name or number? I think it's name. And it's just a unique identifier for everything on AWS. So your user account has an ARN, your S3 buckets have ARN, policies have ARNs. Everything has ARNs here on AWS. So we have this policy, and I'm actually going to attach it as the ByteChek user. And what's going to happen here is when terminal catches up, now that this policy is attached to this ByteChek user, if we try to run back right now, right, and run that same command that we just ran, the S3 ls command, we should get an access denied here. That's how fast this works. And then the reason being is because, again, now I have to authenticate with MFA in order for my permissions that I just had 2 seconds ago to be applied. So that's a really great way for you to immediately fix things. And if you see here, my AJ account is in the admin group. So I still have those same permissions. I'm still able to get through this and do things. But let's go ahead and apply that to the AJ account as well. And actually, I'm not going to do this the hard way. I'm going to do this the easy way. And group name is going to be admin, I believe. Whoops. And I want to use this doing the AJ account, because if I used it doing the ByteChek account, it would not work. All right. So now I effectively have locked myself out from doing anything in the console, because my AJ account that I have configured here, it's still working. Let's give it a second. That's not good. Unless that group is not called admin. There it goes. All right. So now I'm denied. So what do you do here? And the way that you fix this, and the reason, so the AJ account, if we go back to the console, which we won't, has virtual MFA device enabled, right? I have MFA enabled on that device. That's the only one, if you remember in the credential report. And a thing that I actually didn't know a lot about prior to maybe a few months ago was that I could apply this policy did apply here in the CLI, and that there's a way to go about authenticating with MFA here in the CLI. So I'm going to go ahead and authenticate with MFA Well, sort of. I'm gonna run the command, then I'm gonna pause because I'm gonna get my access keys and secret keys here on the screen, and I don't want you all to see that, even though I'm going to delete everything. But we're gonna go ahead and authenticate with MFA. I'm going to update my credentials, and then you're gonna see that as soon as I do this, I'm going to be able to run all those commands that I was just trying to run. So let's give myself an hour. This command here is how you authenticate with MFA. So you're seeing AWS STS. STS is the security token service, which is gives you temporary credentials to do things on the console. So if you ever use cross-account access and do role switching, STS is the service that you're doing that to get temporary credentials. And then your serial number for your MFA device is going to be, again, an ARN that you can get either in the console or the CLI. Let me get my code here, 486811. All right. And then this needs to be applied to my AJ account. So I'm going to stop sharing before I hit enter so that I can get this access key and secret key and session token and all that. And then I'm going to go into my text editor and update this. So I see a bunch of questions in here. So if you guys want to go ahead and throw some questions at me, I will try to answer them as I'm going through and updating my credentials here in the CLI.
Yeah, there was actually a question that I wanted to ask, and Adrian has actually also asked it. How do you handle the services with this policy? Because you said that, the first action is to, enable MFA, but not all accounts are user accounts. Some of them might be service accounts. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, if you're doing, if you're having you should not have hard coded credentials like that. I would say there's a service called AWS Systems Manager that you can use this thing called the parameter store, or apologies, I'm messing things up over here as I'm trying to answer this question. I forgot to copy the access keys and stuff, and so I went to add them, and I didn't have the information. But I would use the AWS Sessions Manager or not Sessions Manager. That's for something else that we're going to talk about. But AWS Secrets Manager or the Parameter Store to store credentials for services or for non-human identities. But if you have to do this for a non-human identity that doesn't have access to the AWS Management Console, the way that you would, especially if you're doing a common thing there is SaaS apps, where you allow a SaaS application to access your AWS environment. What you want to make sure is that role that you're provisioning for that company or that application includes an external ID. And that external ID is going to make sure that it's a unique token for that application, so that no one can do any man in the middle type of attacks and be able to take over your account in that manner. But MFA on straight services or just a user account that's hard coded in there is going to be pretty tough. And so you want to make sure that you don't do that. just don't do it. Put it in parameter store or secrets manager is my suggestion. Great question though.
Thank you. I think that's the only question we have so far.
Okay. So I authenticated, you guys saw the STS get session token command that I ran, and then you're going to see now this. So before I was denied access to run this account with my AJ account, but now that I've authenticated with MFA, I have all my rights back. So really, again, just a powerful way to say, all these users don't have MFA enabled. I want to require them to do this without having to email them and check up on it. Because again, if you have 100 users, you want to be able to do this at scale, and you want to be able to do it quickly. So spent the first 30 minutes there, probably a little bit longer than what I wanted, but I think it's important to see that, in 30 minutes, right, you're able to see a bunch of users don't have multi-factor authentication, and then you're able to go out and tell your boss, hey, our multi-factor authentication issue's fixed. when I showed up today, 90% of our users didn't have MFA enabled. Now when I'm leaving today, everybody has to have MFA enabled or they're not going to be able to do their job. So they're going to go out and do it. They're going to go out and enable MFA. So just really cool way. Just to recap, the first thing was get that credential report. Let's take a look at this credential report. Let's really understand what's going on in this account. Let's understand the users, get all this information, and then go out and fix the MFA issue. Every single AWS account I've ever audited, when I've downloaded this credential report, there were users without MFA enabled. Every single one, literally 100% of the time. So this is an issue. This is a problem out there, and this is a way to fix it. This is a way to fix it without you having to think about it or do anything. And that's one of the things you should be trying to do in security. So step 3, go and get the Trusted Advisor report. And there's 2 common themes with the Trusted Advisor report and the IAM credential report. They're both free and accessible to any account that's out there. It doesn't matter if you're a business support account, a developer account, an enterprise level account. It doesn't matter if you are using the free tier on AWS and you have never spent any money with AWS. You can get these reports to find out very important information about your environment. So the Trusted Advisor report, if you are like I am right here in a free account, you get access to 6 core security checks and 1 other service limit checks, which we won't get into. We'll just focus on the security checks. And as you can see here, these are 6 security things that you really should be looking at, regardless of spend and all of that. Like MFA on the root account. This is something that the Trusted Advisor is checking. If you go get this report and you see that that's not enabled, stop everything you're doing. Go find out who owns that root account and get MFA enabled. IAM use. These 2 go together. Even if you have MFA on the root account, if you only have the root account created, that's the wrong answer, because that means you're using the root account. So this is where you need to make sure that you have at least 1 IAM user that's been created for the account. The other checks here are really important. This one right here is what we're going to focus on, this Amazon S3 bucket permissions. And if you know anything about AWS or if anyone's watching this, I think in the future, pause the video, go on YouTube, type S3 bucket breaches, go down the rabbit hole, come back to us in an hour, and you're gonna see so many organizations that have been breached because of open buckets. And it's just not necessary. It's just really not necessary because of the auto-remediation that you can set here. The other thing here, security groups for specific ports unrestricted. So it's great, Faith, that you have a networking background, because you're gonna understand this weakness, right? You're gonna understand that people open up, allow IP addresses to SSH or RDP to an instance. Oftentimes in modern architectures, right, we have a bastion host set up where you're going to go to the bastion host and you go from the bastion host to jump into the environment. And this check here checks to make sure that there's no security groups that are allowing anyone from anywhere on the internet, so 0.0.0.0 IP address, to access your resources over sensitive management ports like port 22, 3389, 1433, any of your FTP ports, anything like that that's wide open to the world. And oftentimes I get organizations that say, hey, I really need to have my bastion host. I need users from anywhere to be able to access my bastion so that we can jump into the environment. You don't need to do that in the cloud. It's not necessary. You can put all of your instances behind a private subnet and still access them over SSH or RDP using Systems Manager, Session Manager, which is a interactive shell. And actually all 3 cloud providers now have interactive shells that you can use in your web browsers that you do not require you to actually have public IPs. And you can actually use Session Manager through the CLI. And maybe I'll come back on to show that, because that's really powerful, that you can SSH to a server has no public access, and you can do it from your terminal right there on your machine. But we're not going to get into that. But Faith, you may enjoy that we can start to make networking a little bit easier, where you don't have to fight with people and say we can't have that type of stuff open, and they can actually configure things in a more secure manner. What we're going to focus on are these S3 buckets and fixing these S3 buckets. So the next step 4 is auto-remediation. We want to auto-remediate a lot of this stuff. And what I mean by that is that when these S3 buckets are created, we want, regardless of the security configurations, regardless of if I was just creating them in the console in the CLI like I was just doing, you want to have those meet your security requirements every time, because we saw how easy it is to create resources in the cloud, right? You can spin up an S3 bucket so quickly. I can make a mistake. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm a human. We have to stop saying in security that humans are the weakest link. We all know that. We all know humans make mistakes, and we can't create perfect humans, but we can start to try to create perfect environments that can detect those mistakes and quickly fix them. So I'm going to I'm lying again and going back to a slide because I do want people to visualize this. And this slide is from a presentation I've given in the past around stopping these leaky buckets for the ISC Squared Miami chapter, which I'm on the board for. And what you're seeing here is the use of a few services. The main service is AWS Config. So I know Trusted Advisor and Credential Report were free. Config is not. It does have a 30-day free trial though, so you can, if you're new at your organization and they're not using Config, go ahead and spin up that free trial, tell your boss what you fixed, and see if they want to pay for it moving forward. But the way that this works, just really quickly, is AWS Config has a preset group of managed rules. I think there's about 98 or so of those rules at this point, and they grow almost every week. And you can even write your own rules if you want. But these rules check compliance status against key things like S3 bucket encryption, public access, and other things, security group stuff like we were talking about with the network. You can set some rules to say, if someone creates an open security group, remediate that right away, fix that right away. And the way that this works is AWS Config will check the bucket compliance. They'll record the compliance status utilizing these Lambda functions. And then you can trigger something that's called AWS Config Auto-remediation. And this is really cool and pretty recent. I think maybe in the last year or so is when this came out, if I recall correctly, because before you would have to use AWS Config with Lambda, write a Lambda function to fix this, and then do some weird stuff with like CloudWatch events. And you just jerry rig like 10 services together to get the same outcome. But with AWS Config now, you can do it all within the same service, and you don't have to do this in the CLI. So I know the CLI may be intimidating for some people, especially if you've never done anything there. This presentation was me showing people how to do this without even writing a line of code, just doing it, clicking in the console. So this is something that you can do where Config will find out, hey, you created a bucket that was not encrypted, that was left open to the internet or to the world. I'm going to go out, I'm going to fix that automatically. And if you want, you can have it send a message to Slack saying, hey, AJ just created a public bucket. I fixed it, but you should probably go talk to AJ and figure out why he's creating public buckets. So let's take a look at config really quick and see how this is set up. And the first thing that I want to point out, and this is, I remembered why I created that bucket in the US East 1 region, is because AWS Config is a regional service, and it's very, very important to understand the difference between a regional and a global service on AWS. And the reason being is that regional services are only going to perform functions in their region. So if you create a S3 bucket in the US East 2 region, which would be the Ohio region over here, or any other region, this rule of auto-remediating this bucket won't apply to those resources in different regions. Now, there's ways that you can go about that. There's some multi-region setup stuff. There's some multi-account setup. If you can see here, there's this aggregator, and there's ways that you can do that. But it's really important, especially for anyone just getting started on AWS from a security perspective, understand the difference between a regional service and a global service. Some of the global service you're going to find are Trusted Advisor, which is why it's a really great service because it sees your resources across your entire account. S3 is a global service. IAM is a global service. And if you think about that from an identity and access management perspective, that makes a ton of sense for that to be globally applied. But AWS Config, Inspector, CloudTrail, if you configure it a certain way, is also regional, and CloudTrail is a very important logging service. So whenever you're wondering, is something a regional versus global service, look up here in the far right, you're going to see the region listed. When we pop over to S3, you'll see that it says global up there. And that's really just your trigger of knowing the regional versus global. So like I was
AJ, sorry to interrupt you. There's a question from Adrian. Let's take the first question. How do you integrate a Terraform script that is run by Jenkins using Secrets Manager? That script needs permissions to alter the resources on the account.
Yeah, it looks like Osman answered that the way that I would have. And I'm not a Terraform, or I wouldn't pretend to be a Terraform or Jenkins expert by any stretch of the imagination. But from what I would understand, I would do that. Exactly what Osman said.
Okay, then let's take his second question. What is your view on the control tower and its guardrails?
Yeah, I like it. I think it does a lot of. I don't know why I would use it over AWS Organizations. I think the description that I saw between Control Tower versus AWS Organizations is if you are starting out and you don't know what to do and you just want to make sure you have a secure kind of architecture, just go to Control Tower because it's going to build everything for you. It's going to set it up. It's going to put the guardrails. You won't have to think about it. But if you know a little bit more about organizations, JSON, SCPs, I would go to AWS Organizations because of how you can customize it and you can really make it your own and really kind of tailor down what guardrails you're putting in. And that's step 5 is AWS Organizations and those guardrails. So we'll get into that.
Great, thank you.
Great questions. Really, really cool. The audience is engaged like this. I like it. So let's take a look at these rules. You can see I have 3 rules here in AWS config with some remediation actions set here. And the rule details here really tell you what's going on. It's going to check to see whether or not S3 default encryption is enabled or that second piece. But the default encryption is really what you're trying to look for. And the reason why config is really great is because it will perform functions when resources change. So when a new S3 bucket's created, it's going to evaluate that. So if a resource's configurations change, it's going to evaluate that. And you can see, excuse me, the resource timeline throughout kind of where the S3 bucket was, when did it change, who changed it, what time was it, and you can really do some triage there with config. But the cool part about this is this remediation action where you can go in and say, I want you to enable encryption on an S3 bucket as soon as this happens. As soon as this happens, go out and fix this. And again, I want to make sure people understand how easy this is. So if you look here and for some reason, sometimes you have to click a few times, but generally, I don't know why this is doing it now. I'm not going to try to troubleshoot, but generally you're going to get a list of all the remediation actions that you could perform on this particular bucket when you click here in this remediation action plan. And that's all you have to do. You just have to click that. And then now you'll be able to remediate things. And you do have to do some setup down here. You have to make sure, again, with IAM, make sure that the role that you want to go and fix this bucket has permissions to do so. Everything has to have permissions on the cloud. But what you're setting here in AWS config from an auto-remediation standpoint is you are being able to say, go to your boss again. I know we have these S3 buckets, and I know some of them were public, but now moving forward, no buckets will ever be public again. No buckets will ever be unencrypted again. And we're going to make sure that one weakness that is a big weakness on the cloud, we're going to make sure that is fine. And that is going to be good moving forward. So you all may have remembered I created that S3 bucket, right? I think I called it the Yawn OWASP. Yep. And we saw the configurations. There's no default and encryption enabled. The bucket was public. And now if we go back and we look at this Yawn OWASP bucket, and one thing I did create this bucket earlier, and because I wanted to show you all, it's in US East 2. Mm-hmm. So the reason why it's still public and it's not going to be encrypted either. So if we open this up and we look at this bucket and see the default encryption, it's disabled. There's no default encryption enabled, right? And that's because Amazon AWS config is a regional service. But let's take a look at the Yawn OWASP bucket. Just immediately, bucket and objects not public. I didn't do that. Remember, we didn't do that when we set this up. It was set up pretty plain. And then look here with the default encryption. We already have Amazon S3 master key SSE S3 encryption enabled, and that's with AES 256 without any of us having to do anything. So I was able to create a bucket. The bucket was created, and it was created against security configurations. Surprise, surprise, everyone. That's going to happen. People are going to do things against your security policy. So what are you going to do to help them when they do make those mistakes? And AWS config is a great way to do that. As you all can see here, that even though I made a mistake, the policies that you put in place here are going to help prevent those mistakes from being catastrophic and causing one of these big breaches that we see out there. So these are two, those two things, Force MFA and S3. That's really just like thinking through what are the big risks in AWS. It's somebody just logging in and being able to do whatever they want because they fished your user and took their credentials or something. And then S3 buckets. S3 buckets are always in the news to be breached, and the reason why is because it's so easy to do the wrong thing, and it's not because people are doing it intentionally. If someone's like, hey, I need a bucket created for this, blah blah blah, all right, let me just run this command really quick, and now I have a bucket done. You send the Slack message, you go to dinner. But we need to have these security guardrails in place. So again, step 4 is auto-remediate. I just showed you the S3 bucket one. Config has 98 managed rules. So take advantage of what's already pre-built there. You don't have to know all of this stuff. Just take advantage of what's built there, and then you can go out and implement these things. So number 5, and to kind of preface number 5, this is not a step that you're probably going to complete on day one. This is something that you're going to get started on day one, right? But it's not going to be something that you complete. And step number 5 is to use or begin to use AWS Organizations. AWS Organizations, someone already asked about CloudTrail, really cool service, or not CloudTrail, I'm sorry, Control Tower. AWS Organizations is very similar. And the person that asked about Control Tower talked about guardrails. That's what you can do with AWS Organizations is you set these guardrails, you get the guardrails in place so that people can't do bad things.
Hey, there's actually a question in the comments from Adrian. So he asked, is there any particular reason to blanket ban public buckets? He says, if you're using one for statistics, is it recommended to always have it behind CloudFront or another service?
No, there's actually legit reasons to have public buckets. I have, if you go to the bytechek.com/SOC 2 white paper, you can download our SOC 2 white paper without giving up your email, because I don't believe in making people give up their email to download good documentation. And that white paper is stored in an S3 bucket. So the cool thing with config is you can exclude certain buckets from that rule. You can say, hey, all buckets except this one need this rule to be applied. So another common thing is what I think Adrian's referring to is if you're hosting a static website on an S3 bucket, which is something that you can do, and you put it behind CloudFront from a speed perspective, it helps your website run really fast. And sometimes you'll have images in that bucket that need to load on that website, right? You need anybody to be able to see those images. You don't need it to be private. That's another reason why you would have a public S3 bucket. So there's a ton of reasons for S3 buckets. The problem is, or for S3 buckets to be public, the problem is if you don't have these guardrails in place, what if someone creates that bucket with customer data or with credit card data or social security numbers, something very sensitive, right? You want to make sure that you're not allowing those type of buckets to be created publicly. So Adrian, to answer your question, you don't need a blanket ban public buckets. Good security is contextual. It has context. If you're just applying security policies without context, you're not going to be successful. So you should find out if there's any reason for public buckets out there, and then exclude them from that config rule.
I like that. Good security is contextual for sure. Yeah.
I see another one here that I'll just go ahead and answer. Is it possible to have an S3 bucket in a VPC in a private subnet? Yeah, and then never mind. Adrian is on it. Yeah, so S3 buckets actually live in this weird space in AWS. So you have your VPCs, which is your private cloud, right? Then you have the public internet, and S3 buckets live in the middle on like the AWS backbone. And the way that you generally would give a private VPC, a way for a private VPC to access an S3 bucket is by creating a VPC endpoint. And that allows you to not require your private traffic to go to the public internet to come back to this S3 bucket that's on the AWS backbone. So all that to say, S3 buckets, they're not going to be in a VPC. You're not going to apply them to a VPC. And the way that you control access is through bucket policies. And that's just, again, going back to everything on AWS, you have to allow something to happen, and you have to explicitly allow it. So really great questions. I like the show already. I want to come back because the audience asks questions, and I really just, I enjoy that. I enjoy when I'm not just talking and screaming at myself the whole time. So back to AWS Organizations, really important setup here. And this isn't an AJ-ism. I'm not just coming up with this. If you, and I think I provided the links to Nancy and the team. Scott Piper came out with this AWS security roadmap, which is just a tremendous document. He's been doing it for about 3 or 4 years now, and he updates it every year. And it lists out everything that you need to do to have a secure environment in AWS, step-by-steps, links to AWS documentations, all kinds of stuff. So check that out. And the first thing that he tells you to do is implement AWS Organizations. So I went about it a little bit backwards, right? And the reason is because this takes a little bit, and I want people to go fix things first, right? You don't want to wait till AWS Organizations is set up. Go fix everything. Go make sure that people can't log in without MFA. Go make sure you don't have any S3 buckets public, and then let's set up AWS Organizations. Let's get right to it here. And Scott recommends that you have at least 3 accounts. And the number one argument I get from customers or people about AWS Organizations is, oh, I only have 1 account. I only have a single account. Why would I use this? If you only have a single account, you're wrong. You should not have a single account. And the number one reason is from a security perspective. From a security perspective, you want to limit your blast radius. You want to make sure that if something bad happens, it can't impact everything. And you want to make sure that you can contain it. That's one of the biggest things in incident response is containing it. You want to contain the incident and make sure that it can't spread and go any further. So the reason why you would set up multiple accounts is not because you need everything to be segmented that way, or you need these accounts from a business perspective. It's, again, from a security perspective. So the way that you would set this up, Scott recommends 3 accounts. I recommend 4. I recommend a billing account. And that billing account should have no resources in it. Should have nothing. It should literally just have an email address and where your main AWS organization master account is set up. So the only thing that you'd be doing there is applying these service control policies, which we'll talk about here in a second. The reason why you don't see the little dots around the billing account from a service control policy perspective is because you can't apply service control policies on the master AWS Organizations account. Another reason why you don't want any resources in that account, because you can't apply these guardrails that we're about to talk about. The second account, obviously, you're going to need your production account. You're going to need where your application lives. That's going to have your whatever you're running it on, EC2, containers, Elastic Beanstalk, whatever it is that you're running this thing on, you're going to have that in a production account. But you shouldn't have any users in that account. You shouldn't have actual people in that account. The reason, and you want to, and those where, so you're like, oh, okay, how do my users, where do I put my users? How are people going to access this? You put them in their own account. You put them in a people account. And the only thing that they have in that account are just users. So again, if for some reason your Force MFA policy was deleted and someone was able to get their account hacked, when I get in there as a bad actor, I'm looking around and I'm like, where's everything at? Where are all the stuff? And there's no stuff because you don't have any resources in that particular account. You only have users. And the way that you would get to these other accounts is using cross-account access, and that's using IAM roles, which we won't get into. We can definitely have another class on that because that's just a huge topic on AWS is using cross-account access. But so you have that people account, and then lastly, you'll have a security account. Your security account should store your logs. It should be where you manage your overall security program using Security Hub and Guard Duty and all these other cool services on AWS. You would have it all go there because your developers don't need to be in your security S3 bucket. Your developers don't need to see Security Hub findings. Your security team needs to see that stuff. And they also don't need to be able to delete anything in there or modify any configuration. So again, you just want to segment this out following the principle of least privilege when it comes to access. And have these different accounts. And the reason why AWS Organizations is really cool is because of service control policies. And service control policies are just like IAM policies, but the reverse. They're not going to explicitly allow any action, but they're going to stop you from doing certain things. So a very easy example to understand here, that's a tangible example that I've seen before, is you can apply service control policies to say you can only deploy resources in a certain region, like US East 1. You can say, I know we're only going to be in US East 1. There's no reason to have resources in EU West 2. So I'm going to apply this service control policy that says if you're not deploying a new resource or a new whatever in US East 1, it's going to be denied. And why is that important? Because there's been times that companies have had their accounts breached, and the hacker didn't go in to steal anything. They went in to run the company's bill up. And they went and deployed resources in like EUS2 doing like Bitcoin mining. And the only reason the company finds out is because their bill is $10,000 next month. That was once a $100 bill, because these EC2 instances have been running like, oh, wait, we don't have any resources in London. That's crazy. Why would we do that? It's because you've been breached and now somebody's doing something over there. So this limits, or developers, oftentimes I do it. I'm testing something out. I'll just pop into another region to do some tests real quick, and I forget to delete my resources. So now your bill runs up again. So again, just from a billing perspective, security perspective, those service control policies apply those guardrails. You can put service control policies to say that only certain users can do certain things. Certain users can, so in your people account, you can say the only thing that you can do in this account is use IAM. You can't use EC2, you can't use S3, you can't use literally no other services but IAM. In your security account, there should be no reason for anybody to stand up or create Lambda functions or do anything with Route 53. So you can say you can't do anything in these accounts. So again, if someone does break in, they're limited to what they can do. That can only be the things that you want them to do. So AWS Organizations, the reason why we're not doing any demonstrations on this is because it's a lot of work. Not something that you can do quickly, but it is something that you should look into and have these separate accounts, and just make it a lot. It makes your life a lot easier. The first thing people think about, I don't want to manage 5 accounts. If you're using AWS Organizations, you're not managing 5 accounts. If you're on the security team, you're only managing the security account because that's where everything's flowing, and you set all these other things up. So just to recap, number 1, you're going to get the credential report, right? You're going to find out what's going on with your users. Number 2, you're going to implement the Force MFA policy because there's going to be users without MFA. Number 3, you're going to go get the trusted advisor report to find out those 6 core security checks to find out what's going on with that account. Number 4, auto-remediation. There's no excuse not to go ahead and auto-remediate using AWS config, fix something, show your boss the power of what you can do with config. And then number 5 is the long-term strategy, right? We're going to use AWS Organizations. We're going to segment these accounts. We're going to make sure that if something bad happens, it's not going to be catastrophic to the organization. It's going to be a minor event because you've segmented your account and you're using the power of this multi-account AWS organization setup. So that's the 5 steps. I see we have some more questions, and I know, Nancy, I went right over the hour, but I definitely appreciate you all for listening this long and letting me do this.
No, it was perfect. Yeah, perfect
I'm sitting
overview.
over here feeling like, yes, preach. I love this.
Excellent. No, and I think we covered most of the questions already. There was a bunch of comments. We went over the hour. That's perfectly fine. I'd just like to know a bit more about ByteChek. You know, I know you have a really cool slogan, I guess. You make SOC report or compliance suck less. What do you make suck less? Remind me.
I love that.
We make compliance suck less, but yes. Compliance is a loaded word, right? Compliance means a lot of different things to a lot of different companies. When I was in my audit consulting days, I would perform SOC 2, ISO 27001, FedRAMP, PCI, HIPAA, the full alphabet soup out there of compliance frameworks. And the reason why we make compliance suck less is because we focus on security. Because there's a saying out here, right? Compliance is not security. 100% agree. You can get a compliance report and you cannot be secure. But security is compliance, and every single time it will be, because all of these compliance frameworks say the same thing. They're saying protect privileged users, encrypt your data, do vulnerability scans, all the same stuff. So if you just peel that back and you say, all right, I'm going to ignore all of these standards and frameworks, I'm just going to focus on security, you're going to become compliant, but also you're going to get more value out of the actual compliance assessment that all these companies have to go through. And that was a part of the passion for starting ByteChek. Was I saw the investment it takes to get a SOC 2 or an ISO cert. It's a lot of work for the organization, and it's a lot of money. It costs a lot to do these things. So if you're going to spend that much money, you're going to spend that much time doing it. We created a product so you can get better value out of it, so that you're not dealing with an auditor who's asking for screenshots out of the EC2 console for security groups, and they're actually using a tool that connects directly to AWS. And a lot of the things that I just showed you all, our tool automatically checks for. And I'll give you one example of this whole security compliance type of thing, right? And this recently happened last week for one of our early customers. We recently released about 6 new controls that we're testing on AWS this past week. Went through and those controls were automatically updated in their environment, right? And they didn't know they had those weaknesses. They didn't know that those issues were present in their environment. If we were just doing a typical SOC 2, they would never have seen that stuff. But our tool, because I'm constantly evaluating new things on AWS and seeing new controls out there that we should be checking for, new weaknesses out there, and our platform updates as we get new information. So now our customers get to have an updated, better environment. Yeah, it's not gonna be something that moves the needle whether or not they pass SOC 2, but it does move the needle on them being secure, which is all we care about, is will you be more secure? So our platform automates a lot of the evidence collection associated with these assessments, because I think that's the reason why people don't focus on security, is because they're worried about collecting evidence. They're just trying to get screenshots and tickets and all this other stuff. So we connect directly to AWS, Azure, GitHub, Jira, all of these different applications where the evidence lives, so that the auditors and the clients don't have to worry about the evidence collection. It's like, let's focus on the stuff that matters. Let's focus on security. The difference and the reason why we created this was because there's a lot of tools out there in the cybersecurity compliance space. There's a lot of tools that claim that do what we do, right? The difference is my co-founder and myself, we've actually been auditors. We actually understand what goes into an audit. So we didn't just focus on evidence collection, because audits are not just evidence collection. Audits are reports. They're back and forth with auditors. There's emails, there's follow-up requests. There's all these other things that you have to do, such as creating a section 3 for your SOC 2, which is like a 20-page document that's just painful. So in our platform, we have things like a section 3 generator to make that process easier. We have the ability for you to do your annual policy tests, where you have to do those tabletop tests for your business continuity and disaster recovery. You can do that directly in the platform. You can perform vendor reviews, risk assessments. You can create information security policies and have your employees acknowledge the information security policy. So anything that goes into a compliance assessment, because we experienced it firsthand and it sucked, we decided to create a platform to make it suck less. And that's what ByteChek is.
But that's also a good segue, because I've heard you, and I've enjoyed it, talk a lot about how you were, a more technical auditor than average, right? And that's how you...
I'm actually really surprised.
How technical he is for an auditor, right?
Yeah, because the experience I've had with auditors is the exact difference.
Yes. And also you need to, I feel like from going from on-premise and with the cloud migration, I think you had to adapt your skills. So I guess my question is more about advice. And we had also Pablo in the chat asking for certification advice, but I'll go larger than that. For somebody who's an auditor, or someone who's been, who doesn't have maybe those technical skills, but wants to get better, how would they get those skills? Would you recommend certifications? And maybe, how do you get better at this and hands-on? Because you didn't learn all this just by doing certifications.
No, it's a whole lot of frustration is how you learn. But no, the thing with auditing and the auditing space that I definitely am seeking out to change is that term technical auditor it bothers me, because all auditors nowadays are evaluating technical environments. So what's the alternative if you're not a technical auditor? You should be a technical auditor. And that doesn't mean that you can get into the CLI and do all those things that I said, right? That's not what that means. What it means is that you understand that an EC2 instance is a server, or that you understand that an S3 bucket stores objects, or that if my client's in the cloud and they're using RDS, I know what it means and I understand what those things, and that's what I think all auditors should do. And I'm a big fan of certifications, huge fan of certifications, not because of the cert, but because of the process, because of the journey, and then because of the the thing about certs, it's you and the computer and those questions. At the end of the day, everybody talks about kind of the process is, someone just crammed and they passed the test. Doesn't whatever method it was for you to take, it's you and that computer, you and that testing center completing that cert. And I think certifications, if you go about them the right way, will teach you a lot. And I would encourage anyone, if your company is hosted on AWS, go and get the AWS Cloud Practitioner. It's a cert that's designed for non-technical folks. It's designed for sales, marketing, etc. But it's a great foundational cert to just, at a minimum, it teaches you the language of the cloud. It teaches you what is an EC2 instance, what are the different pricing models, why do people move to the cloud? It teaches you that stuff too. And those are just the basics that any auditor should know. An auditor should not be asking their customers about physical security at AWS. And the reason is because they understand the shared responsibility model. They should have an understanding of what that means, right? So those are the things that, if I'm a person that's not that technical and I'm like, I don't want to be that technical, because it's not required for everybody to be super technical, right? Still do a little bit of the work, put a little bit of effort out there to get the basic skills to understand the foundations of whatever technology is you're using. So I would encourage people for cloud, any type of cloud training. I'm not a fan of the cloud agnostic certs like the CCSP or CCSK and stuff like that. And I have the CCSK. I'm not a fan of it because all of the stuff you learn there, you're going to have to go relearn for the whatever specific cloud provider that you're going to go learn, because everybody calls things differently. So focus on one cloud provider. Go out and go all in. I only chose AWS because it was easy for me. I'm not a Microsoft person, so Microsoft's very hard. GCP is more geared to like a traditional developer, in my opinion. If you have a good programming background, GCP will be a lot easier for you. AWS was just easy for me, and all three cloud providers are great. A great choice. Like, you're not going to go wrong. You're going to be able to find a job if you become an expert in any of these cloud providers. So don't think that you have to choose AWS or Azure or GCP, whatever it may be, but pick one and go all in on it to learn as much as you can about it. But if you're just looking to start and get the basics, I started with the cloud practitioner. That was the first cert I got. People were making fun of me for getting it. It's an entry level cert, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. The cloud practitioner is a great start. It's a great place
to start somewhere.
Exactly. Too often people try to like jump too high, and I'm like, just don't skip steps, start at the beginning and just go through that process.
Yeah. And I remember doing it a couple of years ago, and I used a cloud guru, and I remember one of the instructors saying that if you do the practitioner, you're maybe 70% into the the associate, one of the associate certs. So it's a really good foundation for all the other certs as. Anything else? I don't think we have any questions from the chat. I'll give you, the last few words. I'll go to Sienna first. Any questions, any feedback, anything you want to say?
Well, being put on the spot like that, but no, I really enjoyed everything that AJ said, because I've taken an offensive security cloud course. And honestly, everything you've touched on are a lot of things that we've focused on too. Even just with the IAM, not having, trusting just the group policy and not really digging into it. That's where a lot of some misconfigurations or bad privileges could be given to somebody that doesn't need it. Also, just like the MFA, that's a low-hanging fruit if you don't have it set up. So a lot of the stuff that you've given, I'm just like, that's exactly. So that's why I didn't have any questions. I'm sitting here like, yes, I love this. This is free. So yeah, great. I appreciate it. Good talk.
What about you, Fit? Anything you wanted to add? On the spot.
Yeah, on the spot, directly, right? So I do agree with the low-hanging fruits that AJ has mentioned. I don't necessarily agree that I will just turn them on without at least, notifying the people. But definitely, these are things that need to be done in the environment.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. AJ, I'll give you the last closing words before we go. Anything you want people to know about you, about ByteChek, about their security career, anything like that?
Shameless plug.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of not overt marketing, so people can find me and they can find ByteChek. I'm wearing the shirt, so go to bytechek.com. I definitely appreciate talking about it and helping organizations achieve their compliance goals. But I'll spend my last minute or so talking about something that I'm extremely passionate about in cybersecurity, and that's fixing the perceived cybersecurity skills gap out there. And all these jobs that are going unfilled every year. I think there's a stat out there like 3 million by 2022. And my something that I always like to say whenever I have a platform like this is the only way that we're going to fill the cybersecurity skills gap is by hiring diverse people. You cannot fill these jobs. You can't increase the number of unfilled jobs in this industry by hiring the people that look the same. That look the same as you or the same as everybody else in the industry. So we need to get more minorities, more women into this field because they're skilled. There's not a pipeline problem. I truly don't believe that there's not skilled minorities or women out there. There's a lot of skilled minorities and women out there. They're just not given an opportunity because companies are not looking in the right places. They're not going to the different places to find folks. They're relying on referrals and people that look like themselves. And if COVID-19 if COVID-19 didn't show us anything, it's that we can do things remote and we can have people work from anywhere in the world. So you can start to expand where you're looking for people. And I hope that if anybody is listening and they're in a role as a hiring manager, go back and look and see where are you finding candidates and see if you find candidates from other places that don't look like you. Diversity is key in cybersecurity. It's definitely key in compliance. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And I think that it's a great way for us to change the world by getting more minorities and women into tech. Because as we all know, we all work here. Tech's amazing. It's a lot of fun. And it's a great opportunity to really change your life. So that's all I will end on. I do see somebody said, do we have demos online? Actually, we do. That's something that so just like I don't like to go to a website and have to give up my email to download content, I don't like to go to a software company's website and not get to see the product. It's like, I don't want to have to hop on a call with your sales team to see your product. So you can go to bytechek.com. If you click any of our see a demo buttons, they will go over to our learning center where you can see demos of significant sections of our platform that we're constantly updating. So feel free to check those out. We do a lot on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty reachable. I think, Nancy, you actually reached out to me on LinkedIn initially.
Yes.
So I will respond.
And they have a very fun brand, I must say. You're the only brand that makes me laugh on LinkedIn. So that's pretty good. That's my compliment. Who cares about security?
That's really good.
Okay, so I'll just say before we go, I'll repeat the questions. We shared a form, and I'll put that in the show note asking you who is the chapter leader from your closest chapter, OWASP chapter leader of your closest OWASP chapter close to you, and that we will raffle off a membership for a year for OWASP. And if you're already a member and you register with your OWASP email, we'll give you a gift card instead. And the last thing I'll say is next week, we're going live again with Dr. Michaela Greller with her presentation, Finding Security Vulnerabilities Through Code Review, the OWASP way. It seems to be a very popular topic. I've heard seen a lot of interest for it. So we'll be there on February 7th, next week, next Sunday, same time. So make sure to follow us on YouTube, to subscribe, to follow on meetup.com, LinkedIn, all the social media to make sure that you know what we have coming up. That's it for now, and we'll see you next time.